Hello everyone. Mimi and I would like to give you a brief introduction to the narrative research design. As the name mentions it, this type of design is based on the collection of individual stories and experiences documenting their visions within a social and cultural context. As you might have already guessed, this design is typically used in qualitative research. Educators primarily are the ones who use this type of design to gain a better understanding of individual experiences instead of looking at the bigger pictures as we saw last week in the ethnography design. Of course, there are other fields that use this design, as is in the case of literature, history, anthropology, sociology, and sociolinguistics. Although this design is still developing, in 1990, Stories of Experience and Narrative Inquiry was published as an overview of this type of design. In 1993, Cortázar mentioned three different factors that helped develop this design. First, the increased emphasis on teachers' reflection. Secondly, there was also an emphasis on teacher knowledge, and lastly, there was an empowerment of teachers to tell their experiences. In the same year, the Narrative Study of Life's annual series began. An example of teachers sharing their experience was published in 1996 by Meyer on a collection of experiences called Our Own Stories. Most recently, in the year 2000, Clendenin and Connelly published a book on this design called Narrative Inquiry. In this last one, the authors explain what narrative researchers do. This is a list of the different examples of narrative research. Among them, one can find biographies, personal accounts, and life stories. In the narrative research design, the person who experiences the actions being reported can tell their own story or someone else can do it for them. On the first case, it will be an autobiography, and in the second one, a biography. One can report a whole life history of a person or a specific experience. Although there are so many different types of narrative designs, all of them have the same common 7 characteristics. First of all, they have the individual experiences. This type of design studies usually one individual or a group, but it focuses on individual experiences of each person in the group. They also have chronology of the experiences. Um, in this case, the reporter usually focuses on the chronological order of the events told by the individual. In other words, the past, present, and future of each person is very valuable and is retold um, on the report in order. Now, the collecting individual stories, the reporter will collect the data from interviewing the participants. They can use field text, journals, family stories, photographs, and memory boxes. The reporter could tell their own story, as mentioned before, also on an autobiography. The restoring is the process that follows these steps. First, the reporter rewrites the conversations, then he or she codes the data on the settings, characters, actions, problems, and resolutions, and lastly, everything is rewritten in the chronological sequence. While the researcher rewrites the story, he or she will start looking at the interaction of the characters of the story and their personal interactions, how these experiences relate over time, and the context of the story itself. The coding for themes is that after restoring, the reporter can now identify themes which will add complexity and insight about the understanding of the participants' experiences. Number six is the context or setting, which in this design will also present in detail the setting or context of the story itself, as for example, they will describe the home, school, or workplace. And lastly, you will also see a collaboration with participants. This collaboration occurs in different times during the process, for example, negotiating what to include or not in the story. Now that we have a better understanding of the main characteristics, we will talk about the steps needed to take on a research like this one. To make the steps more lively, we have decided to break them down by using a research called What is Adolescence? Adolescents narrate their lives in Lima, Peru. You can also find this article attached on our thread for this week. Now, the first step is to identify a phenomenon to explore. We assume by reading this article that the phenomenon or question to research was the understanding to understand the factors that influence the lives of Peruvian adolescents in a low-income region outside of Lima. Now, step two was to select individuals from whom you can learn about this phenomenon. And in this specific article, was 20 students or 20 people around the ages of 12 and 17 years old. On step three, we're collecting the stories from the individuals that reflect the personal and social experiences. And in this article, they were interviewing adolescents by doing two different steps. The first one was to create a life map. The adolescents were actually creating life maps of what they remember through their lives. And then they were asked about their individuals' identity as significant events, people, and activities during each life stage. So once they had that life map, the interviewers were talking about it with the teenagers. Step number four is to retell the story. And in this case, we can see that it was done chronologically, and we can see the scripts on page 513 of the conversations, which were also reported to keep the voice of the individuals unchanged, or to make it as real as possible for whomever's going to be reading this article. Step number five is to collaborate with the participants, storyteller in all phases of the research. And we assume that the researchers met with the teenagers several times to collaborate on the project, and that they came to an accordance to what it was going to be included in the report. Step number six is to write the story about the participants' personal and social experiences. And as I mentioned previously, this type of design usually shows themes. So the authors of this research in particular retold the stories by dividing them in 6 different themes. It was happiness and innocence, changes in challenging transitions, family tensions, the role of poverty, the presence of racism and violence, and supports and expectations for the future. And then the last step, step number 7, is to validate the accuracy of the report. And here the researchers had to validate the accuracy of this report. And this could have happened through the whole process by validating the stories as they are being told, and by triangulating the information with other individuals. In one section of this particular report, it was added to add the validity and strength to the report. The authors had the study approved by ethical review committees in the U.S. and Peru. Now, with any design that we have seen so far, ethical issues arise, and in this design, there's not an exception. One can always ask, how can we know that these stories are real or authentic? Are the participants telling us all of the details of the stories, or have they forgotten some, or maybe are afraid to tell us about it? Can we report all this information? What happens if the other characters of the stories do not want to give permission to tell this particular story? And also, am I, as a reporter, changing the participants' voice and ideas by retelling their stories the way that I'm doing it? Now, uh, we are hoping that with the breakdown that we offer you in the previous slides, um, have been, that those have been useful to all of you. But if you still would like to see one more fantastic 5 minutes explanation of this design, we would like to invite you to see this video in here attached. Lastly, we would like to thank you for allowing us to share with you our presentation, and we have for you a quick quiz to test your knowledge. Feel free to see the next slides for the answers. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the week.